Hey guys, so today we are answering a subscriber question, and the question in question is, Frederick, if I want to transition from backend to frontend or frontend to backend, which way is easier? So let's get into it. Well, that is a little bit of a weird question, I would say, but I will comply. Well, the reason why I think it's a little bit weird is because if you're going to try to start to do both, I understand to some people it may make a lot of sense to focus exclusively on one thing, get really good at that, and then move over to the other thing. And you can absolutely do something like that. But I will argue that if your desire is to be a full stack developer and you start from scratch, you don't have any previous knowledge, then there is no real reason for you to just kind of isolate your knowledge to one thing. It's much better for you to start start working on the whole stack, build a full web application, because the thing is that if you start off on the back end and you just write a bunch of REST APIs, that's cool. You can maybe curl those or connect to them a little bit and get some data and do some small things here and there. Same thing goes if you do front end. You may be able to create something that doesn't really do anything meaningful but looks really amazing, but the two together, well, that is the standard. That is how every single money-making application out there on the internet is actually working. So if your desire is to actually do both, then I suggest that you start learning the whole thing, like build real serious web applications. You're going to learn a lot more than if you just focus on one thing in isolation. But as for transitioning, if we really do have this desire to start in one place and then move over to something else, I will tell you that the transition will be very tricky regardless of where you start. It's very tricky to go from front-end to back-end, and it's equally tricky to go from back-end to front-end. That is why quite a few people who call themselves back-end developers just kind of stay there, and front-end people, well, some of them transition, but a lot of them stay there as well. I mean, because you get good at something and then you do that magical thing that is going to crush your career, and that is to get complacent. Well, it's not necessarily going to crush your career, but it's going to halt your personal development, where you go through all the hassle and all the pain and frustration of learning something, getting good at it, and then you settle into that skill and you feel like, oh yeah, I kind of know this, I feel good about this, and then something else comes along and you kind of go, you don't really want to learn that stuff because it's a hassle. I mean, if you can do all the things you really want with this thing you've already learned, right? You don't really have to learn that stuff as well, because I mean, then you're going to be a beginner again and you're going to have to learn stuff. And if you ever have that sensation, you already know that you're basically at your peak, or rather you've already halted your personal progression. It's going to, you might get really good at the thing that you're good at, but the dangerous part is that if you feel that way towards a certain set of tools, that's when you become one of these people who might risk getting kind of redundant in the world, like in the IT world. Because nothing decays in IT. Nothing decays as quickly as tools and like paradigms and all of this stuff. I mean, you need to keep yourself up to date. But if you are going to start somewhere, I would highly suggest that you start on the back end. The reason why I think that you should start on the back end and transition into front end is because backend development will teach you the fundamentals and basically the core in application development. It's a vital part of the system. It is something that you cannot have a web application without some form of backend. And if you understand the backend in of itself, that is going to teach you quite a lot about structure, like system structures. You're going to learn a lot more about programming and good practices and things of this nature if you actually start there. And you will have a better understanding of how the internet works and how most applications actually work. And transitioning into front end will not be easy, but at the very least, starting in backend is highly likely going to teach you the fundamentals, like the really good skill, like very strong core skills that you will need in order to transition and become a really good front-end developer if you wanted to do that as well. Because although you don't do the same sort of work, being good at software development and architecture and system design is a very, very useful thing when you go into front-end as well, because that is actually one of the biggest problems that front-end faces, where most projects fall to shit, I'm sorry to say, because of the lack of well, good practices and good understanding of architecture within that community. But the thing is that you can absolutely claim that it's possible to do the other thing around. You can actually start in front end and go into back end. I mean, it's been done several times before. It's not that it can't be done. It's just that when you do back end work, it's the requirements on you as a developer will, and in order to get kind of good at back end, is a little bit lower. And what I mean by that is not that it's easier, it's more that backend is a much more stable environment. It's very likely that you will get fairly skilled by simply working at any company and just honing your skills that way. Frontend is a little bit different. It requires quite a lot of personal investment to get good at, because even if you work at a company and you get to do front-end work, it's unlikely that you necessarily you're going to evolve your skills and get really good at it, because so many people are really, really bad at it, that it's not a given that you will just get good at it by working with some other person at some company. Frontend is a very, very chaotic and volatile ecosystem, and it requires a lot of personal investment to get good at that. So that's why I argue that it's probably easier to start on the back end and go into front end, because then at least you have some type of foundation skills that you can then build on in order to get really good at front end. And in my personal experience, most of the best front end developers that I know, they are either full stack developers or they started on the back end. So what I want you to take away from this is that I really think that if you're going to try to be a full stack developer or try to do both front end and back end, the best thing for you is to start off that way immediately and not segment things in one bucket or the other, because it makes less sense than what you might think. But if you really do want to go that route, I would urge you to start on the back end, because it's a more stable ecosystem. You will learn really strong, good fundamentals for system designs and just good architecture and practices, if you will, within programming that will transfer very well into this. That mindset and those learnings will transfer very well into front end. But you can, of course, do it the other way around. It's just that front-end requires quite a lot of personal investment to get good at. So that's going to be my answer. Have a great day.